The needle pierced flesh with clinical precision, but what followed defied every principle of modern science. Dr. Helena Voss watched through reinforced glass as Subject 07 convulsed on the surgical table, his body rejecting and accepting the foreign genetic material in violent, rhythmic waves. The vampire DNA, extracted from a creature they'd discovered frozen in Siberian permafrost, impossibly preserved for 12,000 years, was rewriting his biology at the molecular level. His screams echoed through the subterranean research facility 300 feet below Geneva, a sound that would haunt her for the remainder of her unnaturally long life. She didn't know it yet, but in that sterile chamber, bathed in the sickly fluorescent glow of monitoring equipment, humanity had just birthed its first king. And every apex predator with a crown would soon smell the revolution in his blood. His name had been Marcus Webb, 28 years old. Former Special Operations soldier. Volunteered for the Lazarus Initiative when conventional medicine gave him 6 months to live after a catastrophic injury in the Hindu Kush left his organs systematically failing. The consent forms had been deliberately vague: experimental gene therapy, potential for complete cellular regeneration, survival rate unknown. What they hadn't mentioned was that the therapy involved splicing his human genome with genetic sequences from something that should have remained legend. The vampire they'd found had been a female, her body preserved in ice with such perfection that tissue samples remained viable. Her physiology had been a masterwork of evolutionary apex design. Cells that regenerated infinitely, a metabolism that could process any organic matter, sensory capabilities that made human perception seem like navigating the world through frosted glass, and something else. Something that pulsed through her remains like a silent frequency, a biological imperative that even death couldn't fully silence. The transformation took 17 days. Marcus Webb died on the 3rd day. His heart stopped, his brain activity flatlined, and for 6 minutes and 42 seconds he was clinically deceased. Then something ancient stirred in his reconstructed marrow, and his chest heaved with an inhalation that shattered 3 ribs from the sheer force. When his eyes opened, they were no longer the muddy brown documented in his military file. They burned crimson, lit from within by a bioluminescent reaction that would later be identified as a unique form of photophore, similar to deep-sea creatures but infinitely more complex. The irises had restructured themselves into intricate mandala patterns that shifted and rotated when he focused, a hypnotic geometry that made direct eye contact feel like falling into a beautiful abyss. His skin had paled to an otherworldly silver blue, as if moonlight had been trapped beneath the surface. His features sharpened, becoming almost cruel in their aesthetic perfection. High cheekbones that could cut shadows, a jawline that seemed carved from pale marble, lips that remained perpetually dark as if stained by wine or something more visceral. But the fangs were what made Dr. Voss step back from the observation window. They descended slowly from his gums when his mouth opened, elegant and terrible, designed by evolution or something older to pierce and drain with maximum efficiency. They weren't crude or monstrous. They were beautiful. Perfect instruments of predation that gleamed like polished bone in the harsh lighting. The research team had expected increased strength, perhaps enhanced healing. They'd theorized about potential photosensitivity and dietary changes. What they hadn't anticipated was the heat. It radiated from him in waves, not thermal but something else entirely, a pheromonal signature so potent it could be detected through sealed ventilation systems. The female researchers were affected first. Within hours of his awakening, 3 of them had to be removed from the facility, their pupils dilated to black coins, their breathing erratic, their bodies responding to something their conscious minds couldn't fully process. One of them, Dr. Sarah Chin, a molecular biologist with 2 decades of experience and a reputation for unshakable professionalism, had clawed at the observation window trying to reach him, weeping and pleading in a voice that no longer sounded entirely human. The men weren't immune either, though their reactions manifested differently. A primal unease. The instinctive understanding that something higher on the food chain had entered the environment. 2 security officers requested immediate transfer. One suffered a psychological break and was found in a supply closet, rocking and muttering about, the king is here, all the queens will come." That phrase would prove prophetic in ways none of them could imagine. What Dr. Voss and her team didn't know, what they couldn't know, operating within the limited paradigm of human science, was that vampires had never been solitary creatures. The myths and folklore had gotten it wrong, fragmented and distorted across millennia of oral tradition. In their original form, before whatever cataclysm had driven them to extinction or dormancy, vampires had operated on a hierarchical structure more complex than any human civilization. At the apex were the sovereigns, rare genetic aberrations, perhaps one born every 1,000 years, whose biology produced a pheromonal signature that functioned as both claim and challenge. A sovereign scent called to all others of the bloodline, an olfactory coronation that announced the arrival of a potential king or queen. And in response, every ruling bloodline would converge, driven by instinct older than conscious thought, to either submit or destroy. Marcus, though that name was already beginning to feel like an ill-fitting coat, something from a life that had ended on that surgical table, had become the first sovereign born in 12,000 years. And his heat, his scent, was now bleeding into the world through every ventilation shaft, every sealed door, every molecule of air that touched his transformed skin. It would spread. It would travel on winds and in the breath of those who came near him. And it would reach them. The queens. The last surviving members of a species humanity had relegated to myth. Hidden in plain sight, walking among mortals, ancient and patient and hungry for something they thought had been lost forever. And now, across 6 continents, in penthouses and palaces and places far from human eyes, they were lifting their heads. Nostrils flaring. Pulses quickening. Some would feel rage, the territorial fury of alphas who'd held power unchallenged for centuries. Others would feel something more dangerous. What? Recognition. The biological imperative to seek out the source, to test themselves against it, to claim or be claimed by it. The hunt had begun before Marcus even understood what he'd become. By the 32nd day of his transformation, the facility had been locked down. No one in, no one out. Dr. Voss had implemented the protocol after 4 more staff members had exhibited what the psychiatric consultant termed obsessive fixation syndrome. Marcus himself remained in a containment cell specifically designed for him. Reinforced titanium walls, triple-layer ventilation with biochemical filters, observation through digital feeds rather than direct line of sight. They fed him blood. Synthetic at first, manufactured in the facility's biolab, but his body had rejected it violently. Animal blood proved marginally more acceptable, though he consumed it with the mechanical necessity of someone eating flavorless paste. Human blood, procured through carefully documented donations from volunteer staff, that was what truly nourished him. The difference was visible. After feeding on human blood, his skin took on a faint luminescence, his movements became fluid as silk over stone, and the heat intensified to levels that affected people 3 floors away. He spent his time in silence, adapting to senses that now fed him information in overwhelming torrents. He could hear individual heartbeats throughout the facility, each one a unique rhythm he began to recognize. The janitor on level 5 had an arrhythmia. Dr. Voss took medication for hypertension. He could taste it in the air around her. The young intern who monitored his vitals remotely was pregnant, perhaps 8 weeks, her hormonal symphony unmistakable. He could see in total darkness, his vision processing light spectrums humans couldn't perceive. Infrared. Ultraviolet. Something else that highlighted living things like flames in a void. His sense of smell had become a form of reading, each scent carrying information more detailed than any dossier. He knew when people were afraid, aroused, lying, sick, ovulating, dying. The world had become a novel written in biological truth, and he was only beginning to learn the language. But most disturbing was the hunger. Not for blood, though that was present, insistent as a drumbeat. No, this was something deeper. A need for connection that felt hardwired into his restructured neurons. An awareness of profound isolation that grew heavier with each passing hour. He was unique. The only one of his kind in a world of lesser things. The loneliness was existential, oceanic, and it was driving him slowly toward a decision he knew would change everything. On the 41st day the first queen arrived. The facility's perimeter alarms screamed at 2:47 a.m. Security feeds showed nothing. Thermal imaging captured a blur moving at speeds the camera's frame rates couldn't properly record. By the time the security team assembled, she was already inside. Not through any door or ventilation shaft. Later analysis would suggest she'd simply walked through the concrete itself, her body temporarily adopting a phase-shifted state that allowed her to pass through solid matter. That ability alone should have been impossible, but then so should everything else that was happening. She appeared first on the containment level, simply materializing in the corridor outside Marcus's cell. The camera feed captured her for 12 seconds before she destroyed it with a gesture that caused the electronics to explode into sparking fragments. But those 12 seconds were enough. Dr. Voss watched the replay 17 times, her hands trembling, her scientific worldview crumbling like sandstone in a hurricane. The woman was tall, perhaps 6 feet, her frame simultaneously delicate and radiating barely contained lethality. Her skin was obsidian dark, not brown or black in any human sense but a true lightless void, as if she absorbed photons rather than reflecting them. Her hair moved independently of any air current, a corona of silver white that writhed like living plasma. She wore what appeared to be armor, though whether it was clothing or part of her actual body remained unclear, black plates with an organic sheen, traced with patterns that glowed faint crimson. Her face was angular, alien, beautiful in a way that hurt to perceive. High sharp cheekbones. A mouth that was just slightly too wide, lips black as her skin. And her eyes, twin voids filled with rotating stars, literally, as if someone had captured galaxies and trapped them in her skull. But more than her appearance, it was her presence that radiated through the digital feed. Authority. Power compressed into a bipedal form. She was looking directly at the camera when she destroyed it, and Dr. Voss had felt, impossibly through the recording, that the creature was seeing her. Seeing through the lens and the wires and the distance, looking directly into her soul with an expression of contempt so profound it was almost pitying. The alarms continued screaming. Marcus in his cell had gone utterly still. His head was tilted, his reconstructed senses processing what was approaching. Dr. Voss watched through the cell's internal feed as his lips pulled back from his fangs, not in aggression but in something more complex. Recognition, perhaps. Or challenge. His eyes flared brighter, the crimson intensifying to the color of arterial spray, and the heat signature radiating from his body spiked so dramatically that the cell's temperature regulation system began issuing warnings. When the Queen reached his cell door, 6 inches of reinforced titanium with electronic locks designed to withstand explosive breaching, she simply placed her palm against it. The metal groaned. Molecular bonds screamed in protest. And then it liquefied, running down in molten rivulets that hissed and smoked when they touched the floor. She stepped through the opening, her movements unhurried, and stood before him in the space that was supposed to be humanity's most secure containment. The audio feed captured their first words. Sovereign. Her voice was layered, multiple tones speaking in harmony, as if several beings occupied her throat. It resonated at frequencies that made the recording equipment distort. We thought your line extinct. 12,000 years of silence. And now you announce yourself like a child learning to scream. Marcus stood slowly. He was tall by human standards, 6'3", but she matched his height, and her presence made him seem almost small. The heat between them was visible now, distorting the air like summer shimmer above hot asphalt. When he spoke, his voice had deepened, gained textures it hadn't possessed before. I didn't announce anything. I woke up. And in waking you've called every bloodline monarch to this location. Do you understand what you've done? She moved closer, circling him with the predatory assessment of one apex evaluating another. There are 17 queens remaining in this world, sovereign. 17 ancients who've survived extinction events, religious purges, and the slow suffocation of modernization. We've hidden among the prey species, patient, waiting for the world to forget. And you, she stopped in front of him, close enough that their heat signatures merged into a single thermal bloom. You've reminded us what we are. What we were. The scent of a sovereign travels on every wind, through every dream. Already they're coming. And they will test you. Test me for what? Her smile was terrible. Beautiful and terrible. to see if you're worthy of the crown you've been given, or if you should be destroyed before you become what you might be. She reached out with one hand, clawed fingers that gleamed like polished obsidian, and touched his chest directly over his heart. The contact produced a visible shockwave of energy that shattered every remaining camera in the containment cell and caused a localized power failure throughout the level. The feeds went dark. When they came back online 47 seconds later, both of them were gone. The cell was empty except for cooling metal and the lingering heat signature that would take hours to dissipate. A single message had been burned into the titanium wall in letters 3 feet high, the metal blackened and twisted by heat beyond what any industrial process could generate. Dr. Voss stared at those words and understood with absolute clarity that the Lazarus Initiative had succeeded beyond their most ambitious projections. They'd restored a dead man to life. But in doing so, they'd awakened something far older than human civilization. And now that thing was loose in a world utterly unprepared for what was coming. She initiated the final protocol. A signal broadcast on encrypted frequencies to every major intelligence agency and military command structure on the planet. 3 words that would trigger responses ranging from panic to mobilization to flat denial. But even as the message went out, Dr. Voss knew it was already too late. You couldn't contain a sovereign. You could only hope to survive the transformation their presence would cause. Because where a sovereign walked, the old hierarchies reasserted themselves. The ancient powers stirred. And the world would bend or break trying to accommodate what it had forgotten. The queens were coming. All of them. Drawn by heat and hunger and the irresistible call of genetic destiny. And in the collision between ancient bloodlines and modern world, something new would be born. Or everything would burn. Marcus Webb no longer existed. What walked out of that facility, hand in hand with the Obsidian Queen, was something else. Something beginning to remember. Not his memories but older ones, encoded in the vampire DNA that now suffused every cell. Memories of empire. Of bloodlines that had ruled when humans were still learning to make fire. Of a time when sovereigns were worshipped as gods and feared as natural disasters. He was returning to a world that had forgotten him. But he remembered. And with every queen that came to test him, he would remember more. The hunt had begun. But who was hunting whom remained to be seen. The Obsidian Queen, she'd offered her name during their escape, spoken in a language of layered phonemes that his evolving mind had somehow understood. Kethra, which translated roughly to void throne, or darkness crowned, took him north. They moved through the night at speeds that reduced the world to abstract streaks of light and shadow. She could phase through matter, he discovered, and when she touched him, that ability extended to include his mass. They passed through mountains like ghosts through gossamer, emerged in remote wilderness where human presence was measured in decades between visits, not hours. She brought him to her sanctuary. A structure that existed in the spaces between reality, anchored to a cave system in the Norwegian highlands but extending into dimensional pockets that predated human understanding of physics. The entrance appeared to be a simple cave mouth, but stepping through it was like crossing a threshold into a different universe. The interior was vast, impossible, a palace carved from living shadow and crystallized starlight. Spires that reached into infinity. Halls that changed configuration based on who walked them. And everywhere, the sense of age so profound it made human history feel like a brief, flickering dream. This was a sovereign's hold, Kethra explained, her voice echoing through the impossible architecture. Built by the last true king before the collapse. It's been empty for 12,000 years. Waiting. She turned to look at him, those galaxy-filled eyes studying him with an intensity that made his enhanced senses scream warnings. Waiting for you. Why? Marcus asked, though that name was beginning to feel like a costume he was ready to shed. Why help me? If I'm some kind of threat to the existing power structure, why not kill me when you had the chance? Kethra's laugh was like wind through abandoned cathedrals. Kill you? Sovereign, if I wanted you dead, you'd be ash. But I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to prepare you for what's coming. Because unlike some of my sisters, I remember what a true sovereign is. What they mean. And I've waited too long in this diminished world to let ignorance or pride destroy the first chance at restoration we've had since the old times ended. She led him deeper into the hold, through corridors that seemed to respond to his presence, walls brightening slightly as he passed, as if the structure itself recognized what he was becoming. They reached a chamber at what felt like the heart of the palace, a vast spherical space where gravity seemed optional. At the center floated a throne carved from a single piece of black diamond, its surface covered in inscriptions that hurt his eyes to read but filled his mind with fragments of understanding. "Sit," Kethra commanded. "Not a request. A test." Marcus approached the throne, feeling the weight of space itself pressing down on him. Whatever this object was, it carried significance beyond mere symbolism. He could feel it responding to his heat, his scent, the fundamental frequency of his transformed biology. When he sat, the inscriptions flared crimson, and knowledge flooded into his consciousness like a dam breaking. He saw the old world. Not through human eyes but through the perspective of those who'd ruled it. A time when vampires, though they called themselves by older names, names that meant perfected ones or evolution's children, had been the dominant species. They hadn't hidden. They'd built civilizations that made humanity's greatest achievements look like children playing with blocks. Cities of impossible beauty and terrible grandeur. Technologies that blended biology and metaphysics into forms human science still couldn't imagine. And at the center of it all, the sovereigns. They had been rare. Perhaps 1 in every 10 million births would produce a sovereign. A vampire whose biology expressed certain dormant genes, whose pheromonal signature carried the weight of absolute authority. They didn't rule through force alone, though they were formidable in combat. They ruled through presence. Through the fundamental biological imperative that made every other vampire recognize them as the apex. Queens and kings, the most powerful vampires in existence, would still feel the pull, the instinctive need to either serve or submit or challenge for dominance. And the sovereigns had maintained balance. They'd prevented the bloodlines from warring themselves to extinction. They'd guided their species through environmental changes and evolutionary pressures. They'd been rare enough that their power felt divine, common enough that the species always had leadership. Then came the collapse. The knowledge in the throne was fragmented here, damaged by time or deliberately obscured. But he caught images of fire falling from the sky. Of a weapon, biological. Metaphysical? Both? That targeted vampire physiology specifically. Of queens and kings dying by the thousands, their bodies simply shutting down, their cells consuming themselves. The sovereigns had been hit hardest. Their enhanced biology made them more vulnerable to whatever had been deployed. Within a decade, a species that had dominated the planet for 100,000 years had been reduced to scattered survivors, hiding, forgetting, regressing. Humanity had risen in the vacuum. Young, aggressive, numerous. And the remaining vampires had made a choice. Hide among them, survive through secrecy, wait for a world where they might emerge again. The queens who survived were the most powerful, the most adaptable, the most ruthless. 17 bloodlines down from hundreds. 17 ancient females, each ruling her territory through proxies and cloaked power, immortal and patient and nursing a racial memory of stolen dominion. But no sovereigns. For 12,000 years, no sovereigns. The genetic sequence required was so specific, so rare, and their population so devastated that the math simply didn't support it. The vampires had believed the sovereign line extinct. A glorious history with no future. Until a team of human scientists, brilliant and ignorant in equal measure, had taken a dead soldier and rebuilt him with vampire DNA. They'd inadvertently created the exact genetic conditions necessary. The human base had provided just enough genetic diversity to reactivate dormant sequences. The vampire DNA had provided the template. And somehow, impossibly, those two contradictions had produced a synthesis that expressed the sovereign phenotype. He was an accident. A fluke. A statistical impossibility that had nevertheless occurred. And now he sat on a throne that recognized him as legitimate, and 17 queens were converging on his location, drawn by instincts older than consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he hadn't realized he'd closed them. Kethra was kneeling. Actually kneeling. This ancient, powerful being was on one knee before the throne, her head bowed, her posture radiating submission. "I am Kethra, Void Throne, last queen of the Umbral bloodline," she said formally, her voice resonating with harmonics that made the chamber itself vibrate. I acknowledge you, Sovereign. I offer service and information. I will stand between you and the challengers until you are ready to face them. This I swear on my true name and the blood of my line. The words carried weight beyond their meaning. He could feel them settling into reality, becoming binding at a level that transcended mere promise. This was an oath that would hold even if she wanted to break it, enforced by the fundamental laws that governed vampire nature. Rise, he said, and was surprised by the authority in his own voice. Not learned. Instinctive. The throne was teaching him, or perhaps unlocking what the DNA already contained. If you're my ally, I need information, not submission. What should I call myself? Who was I supposed to be? Kethra rose gracefully. The sovereigns chose their own names upon ascension. But until you do, I will call you what the throne names you. She gestured to the inscriptions, which had rearranged themselves into readable text. Not English, not any human language, but something his altered mind could parse. Sovereign of the Crimson Ascension. First of the New Age. Herald of Return. She paused. The throne has another name for you, but it's in the old tongue. It translates roughly to beautiful dying star, or last light before dawn. Prophetic. Ominous. What does it mean? That you will either illuminate the path to our species' restoration, or you will be the final glorious ending of everything we were. The throne doesn't predict which. Only that your existence is pivotal. She moved to a window that looked out over impossible vistas. Multiple landscapes layered over each other like overlapping realities. The other queens won't all respond like I have. Some will see you as an opportunity. Others will see you as a threat to their autonomy. A few, she trailed off, something almost like concern crossing her alien features. A few will see you as something else entirely. What do you mean? The heat you produce, Sovereign. It's not merely a signature of dominance. It's a mating call. She said it bluntly without euphemism. In the old times, sovereigns were rare enough that their selection of mates was a matter of species-level importance. The biological imperative to reproduce with a sovereign, to create offspring that might carry the genetic sequence forward, was profound. Queens who smell your heat don't just recognize a leader. They recognize a potential mate. And the drive to secure you, to claim you, to ensure their bloodline is the one that continues through your genetics. She turned to face him. It will make them dangerous in ways you cannot yet comprehend. They will see you and want you with an intensity that transcends reason. And they are ancient, powerful beings who are not accustomed to being denied anything they want. Marcus, he still thought of himself that way, though it was becoming a smaller and smaller part of his identity, processed this. So I'm what, exactly? A stud to be fought over? If you allow yourself to be. Kethra's smile was sharp. But you're a sovereign. Your biology gives you advantages even queens don't possess. Your heat calls to us, yes. But you can focus it, weaponize it, use it to influence and command. If you learn to control it before they arrive, you'll have agency. If you don't, she let the implication hang. Then teach me. That's why I'm here. They spent days, or what felt like days. Time moved strangely in the hold, training. Kethra was a ruthless teacher, pushing him beyond limits he didn't know he had. She taught him to regulate the heat, to dampen it to nearly undetectable levels or flare it like a beacon that could be felt across continents. She taught him to read the subtle biological signals other vampires unconsciously broadcast, the hierarchies of scent and posture and presence that structured their social interactions. She taught him to fight, not human combat, but the brutal, reality-warping violence that occurred when apex predators clashed. He learned that vampires of sufficient age could manipulate physical laws through will and biology alone. Kethra could control shadows, making them solid or sharp or suffocating. She could phase through matter. She could suspend local gravity. She could do things that looked like magic but were actually expressions of a biology so advanced it seemed supernatural. And he was learning his own abilities. The heat was just one aspect. He discovered he could command attention through presence alone, making anyone in his vicinity focus on him whether they wanted to or not. He could influence emotional states, not crude mind control, but subtle pushes that could turn fear into fascination, hostility into curiosity, resistance into submission. His physical capabilities were beyond even normal vampires. He'd shattered a steel beam during a training exercise without conscious effort, had caught and held Kethra mid-face, something she'd said shouldn't be possible. But the most significant discovery came during a meditation exercise. Kethra had instructed him to reach out with his senses, to feel beyond the immediate environment. When he did, he felt them. Distant pulses like faraway drums. 17 distinct rhythms, each unique, each moving. The queens. He could sense their approximate locations, feel the different qualities of their presence. Some felt cold and ancient as glacier ice. Others burned with barely contained fury. A few radiated curiosity or calculation. And one, distant but approaching faster than the others, felt like an inferno barely contained in flesh, heat that rivaled his own, presence that made his instincts scream both attraction and warning. "She'll be first," Kethra said, having watched his reaction. "I knew she would be. Nephra, the Blood Phoenix. Queen of the Vermilion bloodline. She rules the territories humans call the Middle East, though her influence extends far beyond geography. She's passionate. Impulsive by our standards, though still more patient than any human. She'll have felt your heat and interpreted it as a challenge or an invitation, likely both. When she arrives, it will be spectacular. Is she dangerous? We're all dangerous, Sovereign. But yes, more than most. She's young for a queen, only 7,000 years old. Still remembers what it feels like to burn hot instead of cold. Still cares about things most of us have learned to stop caring about. She'll test you immediately. And if you fail," Kethra's expression was unreadable. "If you fail, she might kill you out of disappointment. Or she might try to keep you as a beautiful, broken thing. I'm not sure which would be worse." Marcus felt the pull toward the approaching presence. His heat wanted to flare, to answer the call racing toward him. Kethra was right, this was going to be spectacular. And dangerous. And utterly unavoidable. How long until she arrives? Hours? Perhaps a day at most. She's not attempting stealth. Kethra moved to the throne room's entrance. "I'll prepare the hold's defenses. Not to keep her out, she'll enter regardless, but to channel where she enters, give you the advantage of terrain. Use the time remaining to center yourself. Remember your training. And Sovereign?" She paused. "Don't die. I haven't waited 12,000 years to lose our species' best chance at restoration in the first real encounter." Then she was gone, and Marcus was alone with the throne and his thoughts and the approaching inferno that would arrive with fangs and fire and intentions he could only guess at. He sat on the throne again, feeling it respond to him, feeding him more knowledge. He learned the names of ancient sovereigns, their triumphs and failures. He learned the genetic sequences that made him what he was, understood at a fundamental level how his biology functioned. He learned the political structure of the old world, the alliances and betrayals, the slow dance of power that had defined vampire civilization for eons. And he made a decision. When Nephra arrived, he wouldn't meet her as a confused human wearing vampire skin. He would meet her as what he was becoming. As a sovereign. As something that commanded respect not through borrowed power but through fundamental right. He stood, feeling the hold respond to his movement. The architecture shifted subtly, corridors realigning, chambers reconfiguring to suit his unconscious preferences. This place knew him now. Recognized him. Would obey him. He walked to the highest point in the structure, an impossible spire that extended into what looked like empty sky but felt like something else. A viewing platform that existed simultaneously in multiple spaces. From here he could see vast distances, not with eyes but with the sensory array his transformation had granted. He could feel the world spread beneath him, sense the millions of human heat signatures going about their brief lives, unaware that the old powers were stirring. And he could feel her. Closer now. A brilliant point of presence racing toward him like a meteor falling from orbit. She was bringing her full power, making no attempt to mask or diminish herself. It was a statement. A declaration. She was coming to meet the sovereign who'd called her from her ancient slumber, and she would arrive as what she truly was. The Blood Phoenix. 7,000 years of accumulated power and personality and purpose, compressed into a single being and aimed at him like a beautiful weapon. Marcus, no, not Marcus anymore, he was shedding that identity like a snake shedding too tight skin, let his heat flare in response. A beacon. An answer. An acceptance of the challenge racing toward him. Let her come. Let them all come. He was a sovereign of the Crimson Ascension. First of the New Age. Herald of return. And if the old world was waking, it would wake to find him seated on the throne, ready to remind them all what his kind had been. The night suddenly brightened, as if a second sun had risen on the horizon. But it wasn't the sun. It was her. Nephra, arriving in a burst of flame that should have been impossible, that violated every known law of physics but didn't care because vampire biology operated on different principles entirely. She was beautiful. She was terrible. She was everything the moment required. And their collision would reshape the world. Nephra didn't land so much as manifest, her presence transitioning from distant to immediate without bothering with the intervening space. One moment the sky was merely bright with her approach. The next she stood before him on the spire's platform, having crossed the final distance in a manner his senses couldn't fully track. The air around her shimmered with heat distortion, reality itself struggling to accommodate her presence. She was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, built like a warrior goddess from ancient mythology. Her skin was bronze, literally, it had a metallic sheen that caught light and reflected it back as copper fire. Her body was athletic, powerful, curves and muscle in perfect synthesis, barely contained by armor that seemed to be crafted from solidified flames. Black plates traced with veins of molten gold, shaped to her form with an artistry that made it unclear where protection ended and aesthetic began. Her hair was the deep red of arterial blood, but it moved like living fire, individual strands occasionally igniting into actual flames before cooling back to hair. Her face was sharp, predatory, beautiful in the way a drawn blade is beautiful, all clean lines and deadly elegance. High cheekbones, a nose that would have been called Roman in human terms, lips the color of fresh wounds. And her eyes. God, her eyes. They were gold. Pure, molten gold, with slitted pupils like a cat's, and they burned with an intensity that made looking directly at them feel like staring into a forge. But more than her physical form, it was her presence that hit him like a physical force. She radiated heat that rivaled his own, a pheromonal signature so potent he could taste it. Cinnamon and smoke and something sweeter, like blood mixed with honey. His body responded instinctively, his heat flaring to meet hers, creating a feedback loop that made the air between them shimmer and dance. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply stood, taking measure of each other, two apex predators meeting for the first time, bodies and instincts negotiating dominance before minds could interfere. Nephra moved first. She closed the distance between them with predatory grace, stopping just close enough that their heat signatures merged, creating a visible aurora of crimson and gold. She tilted her head, studying him with those molten eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was smoke and silk and violence barely leashed. So you're the accident that's called me from my throne. It wasn't quite an insult, but it carried an edge. The human experiment that smells like a sovereign. Kethra believes in you. She's sworn oath to protect you, which is the only reason I'm talking rather than testing whether you bleed as beautifully as you smell. He met her gaze directly, refusing to show the intimidation he felt. And if you tested that, you'd find out whether 7,000 years has made you strong enough to challenge a sovereign. We could try if you're curious. But I'd rather talk. Her smile was sudden and sharp as a knife. Oh, he has teeth. Good. I was worried you'd be one of those weak, trembling things that needs coddling. She circled him slowly, her movements liquid, assessing him from every angle. You're young. Barely 2 months transformed. Your power is raw, uncontrolled. You probably can't phase yet, can't manipulate reality fields, can't even properly use the heat you're broadcasting like a mating advertisement. She completed the circle, standing before him again. But underneath the newness I feel it. The resonance. The signature that doesn't lie. You are what the throne says you are. A sovereign. First true sovereign in 12,000 years. She leaned closer, Close enough that he could see the flecks of darker gold in her irises, close enough that their breath mingled. Do you understand what that means? What you represent? Kethra's been educating me. Kethra sees opportunity. Sees a path to restoring what we lost. She's not wrong, but she's thinking politically. Nephra placed a hand directly over his heart, her palm hot enough that he could feel it through clothing and skin, as if she was touching the organ itself. I'm thinking biologically. You smell like home. Like something I didn't know I was missing until right now. Your heat calls to every instinct I have, tells me to submit or fight or claim or surrender all at once. It's maddening. Intoxicating. Her pupils dilated, the gold of her irises narrowing to thin rings around endless black. So before we discuss politics or territory or whatever rational concerns Kethra has been filling your head with, I need to know, are you in control of yourself or is the biology driving you? Because if it's the latter, this is going to get complicated very quickly. He placed his hand over hers, feeling the heat transfer between them, a circuit completing. I'm in control. Barely. But enough. He let his own heat flare deliberately, a controlled surge that made her pupils dilate further. I know what you're feeling because I'm feeling it too. The pull. The instinct. My body wants to respond to you in ways that would be really inadvisable for a first meeting. He pulled her hand away, gently but firmly, breaking the contact before it could escalate. But I'm not going to be ruled by biology. Not mine, not yours. If something happens between us, it'll be a choice, not a compulsion. Nephra laughed, a sound like crackling flames. Oh, I like you. You're going to be fun. She stepped back, giving him space, and some of the overwhelming intensity of her presence banked, still there but controlled. All right, Sovereign. We'll play it your way. For now. She moved to the edge of the platform, looking out over the impossible vistas of the hold. Kethra has told you about the others coming? 17 queens. All converging on this location drawn by what I am. 16 actually. I'm already here. She glanced back at him. And they won't all be as restrained as I'm being. Kethra will stand with you, she's old enough and wise enough to see the bigger picture. But some of the others? She shook her head. Morgatha of the Carrion bloodline will see you as an abomination, human contamination of pure vampire genetics. She'll try to kill you on principle. Seraphis of the crystalline bloodline will want to study you, dissect you, understand how you're possible. She's the closest thing we have to a scientist, and her curiosity is more dangerous than most vampires' rage. Veolora of the serpent bloodline will try to seduce you, manipulate you into serving her agenda. And Dracaina? Nephra's expression turned serious. Dracaina of the titanium bloodline is the oldest of us. 16,000 years old. She predates the collapse, was already ancient when the last sovereigns walked. She'll test you in ways you can't imagine because she actually remembers what sovereigns were capable of. If you fail her assessment, she won't kill you. She'll do something worse. She'll dismiss you as unworthy and spread that judgment to the others. And if I pass? Then you might actually have a chance at this. At being what Kethra thinks you can be. Nephra turned to face him fully. A sovereign doesn't just lead through power. They lead through presence, through the ability to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that define our species. They're part king, part diplomat, part warrior, part, she paused, choosing her words carefully, part breeding stud, honestly. The sovereigns of old sired children with multiple queens, spreading their genetic sequence across bloodlines, ensuring the trait would persist. It was expected. Necessary. And it made the political landscape incredibly complicated. You're saying that to be accepted as a sovereign, I'd need to breed with us? Yes. She said it bluntly. Not all of us necessarily. But enough to prove genetic viability, to give each bloodline hope that their genetics might continue through your line. The queens who bear your children would have immense political power. Those who don't would be diminished. So expect the competition for your attention to be fierce. And lethal. The weight of what she was describing settled over him. He wasn't just navigating political structures or proving his combat capabilities. He was being positioned as the linchpin for the entire species' reproductive future. Every decision about who to favor, who to breed with, who to pass over would have consequences that would ripple through vampire society for millennia. That's insane. That's reality. Nephra moved closer again, her expression softening slightly. I'm not saying you have to decide now, or that you have to accept this role at all. You could reject it, try to live quietly, hide from what you are. But they won't let you. Your scent has called them, and they will come, and they will demand answers. Demand choices. Demand you. She reached out, not touching him but close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her palm. So you need to decide what you want to be. Human playing at vampire? Sovereign embracing what you've become? Something in between? Because when Dracaina arrives, and she will be here within days, she's going to ask you that question. And your answer will determine whether the next era is one of restoration or final extinction. He looked at her, this ancient, powerful being who'd crossed continents to stand before him, and made his decision. I can't go back to being human. That person died on a surgical table 2 months ago. What I am now, what I'm becoming, it's not a costume I can take off. So if I'm going to be this, I'm going to be it completely. A sovereign. Not because I chose it, but because the alternative is living half a life, running from what I've become. He met her golden gaze. Help me. Not just Kethra but you too. Teach me what I need to know. And when the others arrive, I'll face them as what I am. Nephra's smile was fierce and approving. Now you sound like a sovereign. She extended her hand, palm up, a formal gesture he instinctively understood. I am Nephra, Blood Phoenix, Queen of the Vermilion bloodline. I acknowledge you as sovereign. I offer alliance and instruction. I will not kneel, I'm not built for submission and you wouldn't respect me if I were, but I will stand beside you against those who would see you fail. This I swear on my fire and the blood of my line. He took her hand, feeling the oath settle into place, a binding that went beyond mere words. I accept your alliance. And your instruction. Good. She pulled him closer, not aggressively but with purpose, until they were almost embracing. First lesson, control the heat. Right now you're broadcasting at maximum intensity. Every vampire within 1,000 miles can feel you. It's impressive but tactically stupid. You need to learn to dampen it, to hide your signature when necessary. And more importantly, you need to learn to focus it, to direct it at specific targets. Kethra's been teaching me. Kethra teaches you to dampen. I'll teach you to weaponize. Her hands moved to his chest, her touch searing even through clothing. The heat isn't just a signature. It's a tool. A weapon. You can use it to influence, to intimidate, to seduce, to command. A focused burst of heat at the right moment can make an enemy hesitate, can make an ally's loyalty deepen, can make a potential mate. She trailed off, her smile wicked. Well, you'll learn. They trained through what felt like days, though time remained strange in the hold. Nephra was a completely different teacher than Kethra. Where Kethra was patient and methodical, Nephra was intense and demanding. She pushed him past breaking points, then mocked him when he struggled and praised him extravagantly when he succeeded. She taught him to focus his heat like a laser, to surge it in overwhelming waves, to layer it with emotional impressions that would affect how others responded. She taught him combat techniques that incorporated heat manipulation, how to make an opponent hesitate by flaring attraction in the middle of a fight, how to use the heat as a distraction while positioning for a killing strike, how to create feedback loops that would overwhelm enemy senses. And she told him stories. About the old world, about sovereigns she'd heard of but never met, about the complex dance of power and sex and violence that had defined vampire civilization. She was irreverent, funny in a dark way, and utterly without shame about any topic. She told him about queens who'd warred over a sovereign's favor, about bloodlines that had risen or fallen based on reproductive success, about the last sovereign she'd heard of, a female named Ashera who'd ruled the Western territories and supposedly could control heat so precisely she could boil blood inside an enemy's veins without breaking their skin. Between training sessions they talked. He told her about his human life, about Marcus Webb who'd been a soldier and then a dying man and then a volunteer for an experiment he hadn't fully understood. She listened with surprising attention, asking questions about human culture and technology and society that revealed how little the queens truly understood the species they hid among. "We see you as prey," she admitted during one conversation. "Or at best as children. Short-lived, rarely interesting. We forget that in your brevity you've built things we never imagined necessary. We had time. We could afford to be patient, to let things develop slowly. You have decades, so you compress innovation into frantic bursts." She looked thoughtful. "Maybe that's why you were able to become what you are. A human base brought something we'd lost: urgency. Drive. The willingness to risk everything because you didn't have forever to wait for another chance." Their dynamic was strange, charged, walking a line between alliance and something more intimate. The heat between them was constant, a low simmer that occasionally flared into something more intense. She'd touch him casually while demonstrating a technique, and the contact would send jolts of sensation through his nervous system. He'd focus his heat during training, and she'd respond with her own, creating moments of feedback that left them both breathing hard and carefully, not acknowledging what was happening. But they didn't cross that line. Not yet. Both aware that when they did, if they did, it would mean something beyond personal desire. It would be a political statement. A claim. A choice that would affect how the other queens responded. On what felt like the fourth day, Kethra appeared with news. 3 more have arrived in the region. Dracaina is one of them. She's requesting formal audience. The playfulness dropped from Nefer's expression. "That was faster than I expected." "She flew," Kethra said. "Actually flew. I felt her cross the Mediterranean. She's not hiding her power or her intentions." Nefer turned to him. "This is it. Your first true test. Dracaina is... She's everything a queen is supposed to be. Ancient. Powerful. Utterly convinced of her own superiority. She will not be impressed by potential or promises. She'll want demonstration. Proof. What should I expect? Expect her to test your worthiness through challenge. Not necessarily combat, though be prepared for that. More likely she'll test your knowledge, your presence, your ability to command respect. She'll look for weakness, for hesitation, for any sign that you're not truly what you claim to be." Nefer gripped his shoulders, her expression serious. "And sovereign? Don't try to placate her. Don't apologize or explain or justify. Meet her as an equal. Remind her that sovereigns don't answer to queens, queens answer to sovereigns. She'll respect that even if she hates it." He nodded, feeling the weight of the coming encounter. "Where will she meet me?" "She specified the throne room," Kethra said. "She's bringing 2 others with her, Morgatha and Vealora. A show of force, or perhaps a test to see how you handle multiple queens simultaneously." 3 at once. He laughed, though it sounded strained even to his own ears. "Well, let's not keep them waiting." They descended through the hold's impossible architecture, Kethra and Nefer flanking him like honor guards. As they approached the throne room, he could feel the presence of the waiting queens, 3 distinct signatures that pressed against his senses like physical weight. One was cold, so cold it felt like heat in reverse, drawing warmth out of the environment. One was sharp, crystalline, like breathing air made of microscopic glass. And one was vast, ancient, carrying the weight of eons in a way that made even Kethra and Nefer feel young in comparison. They entered the throne room. The 3 queens stood in a loose formation before the throne, and the sight of them together was breathtaking and terrifying. Dracaina stood at the center, and she was titanium-made flesh. Tall, 7 feet easily, with skin that looked like burnished steel, literally metallic, reflecting light with a gunmetal sheen. Her body was powerful, built like a warrior who'd spent millennia perfecting the art of violence. She wore minimal clothing, just enough to avoid complete nudity, as if armor would be redundant when your skin was already harder than most weapons. Her hair was silver white, long, hanging to her waist in a straight cascade that moved like liquid metal. Her face was angular, severe, beautiful in the way a mountain is beautiful, impressive and dangerous and utterly unyielding. Her eyes were silver, mirror-bright, reflecting everything while revealing nothing. To her left stood Morgatha, and she was death-given form. Skeletal, thin, skin pale as bone, stretched tight over a frame that looked half-starved but radiated predatory power. Her hair was black, lank, hanging in strings around a face that was all sharp angles and hungry eyes. Those eyes were empty white, no iris or pupil, just blank white that somehow still managed to convey sight and judgment. She wore ragged black garments that might have been elegant once but now looked deliberately torn, decayed, as if she was cosplaying her own funeral. Her fingers ended in claws that looked like they'd been filed from actual bone, yellow-white and sharp. To Dracaina's right was Veilora, and she was everything the other two weren't: soft, lush, deliberately sexual. Her skin was the color of jade, with an actual green tint that made her look otherworldly. Her body was voluptuous, curves that would make human artists weep, barely contained by gossamer fabric that concealed nothing while technically covering everything. Her hair was emerald green, thick, cascading in waves down her back. Her face was heart-shaped, delicate, with full lips and large eyes that were yellow with horizontal pupils like a goat's, which should have been disturbing but somehow made her more mesmerizing. She smiled when he entered, a smile that promised every pleasure and warned of every danger such pleasures might contain. 3 queens. 3 expressions of vampire evolution. 3 immediate threats. He walked past them to the throne, feeling their attention track him like weapons acquiring a target. He sat, feeling the throne activate, the inscriptions flaring crimson, the hold's architecture responding to his presence. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority the throne granted, resonating through the chamber. I am the sovereign of the Crimson Ascension. First of the New Age. You've come to my hold, requested audience, and I've granted it. State your purpose. The silence that followed was absolute. Morgatha looked like she'd tasted something foul. Veelora's smile widened. And Dracaina. Dracaina studied him with those mirror-bright eyes, and when she finally spoke, her voice was layered with harmonics that spoke of impossible age. Bold words from a child wearing stolen crown. She took a step forward. You sit on that throne as if you belong there. But that seat was earned by sovereigns who'd proven themselves through centuries of service and sacrifice. You've existed for weeks. You've proven nothing. Demonstrated nothing. Yet you demand respect as if right of biology alone entitles you to rule. Another step. I am Dracaina, Titanium Throne, Queen of the Elder Bloodline. I was old when your species learned to make fire. I knew true sovereigns. Fought beside them. Bred with them. And you? She was close now, radiating power that made the air itself feel heavy. You smell right. Your biology doesn't lie. But biology alone doesn't make us sovereign. So before I acknowledge you, before I risk the dignity of my bloodline on your potential, you will prove yourself. He stood, meeting her at eye level despite her height advantage. What proof do you require? Command me. She said it simply. If you are truly a sovereign, your presence should compel obedience. Your heat should make me want to submit. So prove it. Make me kneel. Here and now before witnesses. Show me that the throne has chosen wisely. It was a trap, of course. If he tried and failed, he'd be humiliated before multiple queens, his authority shattered before it was fully formed. If he succeeded through force, through crude biological manipulation, she'd dismiss it as parlor tricks rather than true dominance. He needed a different approach. He stepped even closer, close enough that their presence fields overlapped. Close enough that the heat he generated and the cold she radiated created a barrier of clashing temperatures between them. When he spoke, it was quietly, just for her. You're right. Biology alone doesn't make us sovereign. And cheap tricks wouldn't impress someone who's lived 16,000 years. He let his heat flare, not at her but around them both, creating a bubble of overwhelming presence that filled the throne room. But you're testing the wrong thing. You don't need me to prove I can make you kneel. You need to prove to yourself that you want to. That after 12,000 years of ruling without higher authority, you're still capable of recognizing it when it appears. He placed his hand over her heart, mimicking what Nephra had done to him. Her skin was cold, hard as metal, but he could feel the pulse beneath, ancient and slow. I'm not going to command you, Dracaina. I'm going to ask. Not because I'm weak, but because true sovereigns understood that forced submission is worthless. You need to choose this. To decide whether you believe in what I represent enough to take the risk of supporting me. Whether you want the old world back badly enough to help build it through someone as flawed and young as I am." The silence stretched. Her eyes searched his, those mirror surfaces reflecting his own face back at him. He could see himself in her gaze, young, uncertain beneath the confidence, but committed, sincere. "You manipulative, clever little beast," she finally said, and there was something almost like approval in her voice. "You turned my test around on me. Made it my choice instead of your demonstration." She was quiet for another heartbeat. "Fine. I choose." And Dracaina, Titanium Throne, Queen of the Elder Bloodline, eldest vampire in the world, knelt. Slowly, maintaining eye contact, she lowered herself to one knee, her hand placed over her heart in formal acknowledgement. "I am Dracaina. I acknowledge you, Sovereign. I do not offer oath. I'm too old and have survived too much to bind myself with words. But I offer recognition. And provisional support. Prove yourself worthy of what you're becoming and I will stand with you. Fail and I will end you myself cleanly and with respect." She rose. "But for now you have my attention. Which is more than any being has held for the last 3,000 years. Morgatha looked disgusted. Veilora looked impressed. Nephra and Kethra, standing at the chamber's edges, looked relieved. He'd passed the first test. But as he looked at the assembled queens, felt the weight of their presence and the complexity of their expectations, he understood this was just the beginning. 17 queens. He'd faced 4, gained the allegiance of 2, the acknowledgement of a 3rd, and the contempt of a 4th. 13 more were coming. 13 more tests, challenges, opportunities, threats. The old world was waking. And he was going to have to navigate it all while staying true to whoever he was becoming. The Sovereign of the Crimson Ascension. First of the New Age. Herald of Return. Beautiful dying star. Last light before dawn. His existence would be pivotal. The throne had said so. He would illuminate restoration or herald extinction. He couldn't fail. Too much depended on him. An entire species' future. The balance of power in a world that didn't even know these powers existed. But as he stood there, surrounded by ancient predators who could kill him in an instant but had chosen, at least for now, not to, he felt something he hadn't experienced since the transformation. Oh, maybe he could do this. Maybe he could be what they needed. What the world needed, whether it knew it or not. He was a sovereign. And the age of hiding was ending. Let them come. Let all the queens converge. He would face them. Learn from them. Lead them if they would let him. And together they would decide what came next. The old world was dead. Long live the new world. Long live the sovereign. The remaining queens arrived over the following weeks, each making their entrance in ways that reflected their nature and bloodline. Some came in peace, curious and cautiously hopeful. Others came with challenge in their eyes and violence barely leashed. He met them all. Learned from each one. Passed some tests, failed others, but survived each encounter and grew stronger, more confident, more truly himself. He bred with 3 of them in those early months. Nephra first, a union of fire and heat that lasted 3 days and left them both changed. Then Veilora, who taught him that pleasure and power were merely different expressions of the same force. And finally, surprisingly, Dracaina, who came to him not out of heat or political calculation but simple curiosity about what it would feel like to mate with a sovereign again after so many millennia. Each union was significant, political, personal. Each produced offspring that would carry his genetic sequence forward. Each deepened his connection to the ancient species he now led. The world was changing. Slowly, carefully, but changing. Vampires were beginning to emerge from hiding, not en masse but in carefully orchestrated reveals. Humanity was being prepared, gradually, for the knowledge that they weren't alone, had never been alone. There were challenges, violence, fear, attempts at warfare from both sides. But there were also alliances. Humans who saw advantage in partnership with beings who possessed knowledge and abilities beyond modern science. Vampires who recognized that the new world offered opportunities the old world had never imagined. And at the center of it all, seated on his throne in a hold that existed between realities, the Sovereign of the Crimson Ascension guided the transformation. Not alone, 17 queens stood with him, each bringing her power and perspective to the challenge of building something that honored the past while embracing the future. They didn't always agree. There were conflicts, betrayals, moments of crisis that nearly tore everything apart. But they endured. Because for the first time in 12,000 years, vampires had what they'd been missing. A sovereign. A center point around which their fractured species could coalesce. A genetic sequence that promised continuation. A leader who understood both the weight of their history and the necessity of adaptation. His heat still called to them. Would always call to them. But now they answered not just with hunger or challenge but with purpose. With vision. With hope that their long twilight was ending and a new dawn, his dawn, was breaking. He'd been Marcus Webb once. A soldier. A dying man. A volunteer for an experiment that had remade him at the most fundamental level. Now he was something else entirely. Something the world had